Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
The Messi Ronaldo collab we never thought would happen is finally here. Oh, not that Ronaldo, this one. Let me explain. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the Adidas Messi F50 Elite in the new Vida Rapida colorway, which translates to the fast life, where you don't even have to be that into football boots to recognize this combination of colors and even a graphic style that certainly relates this back to one of the most famous and iconic football boot designs and colorways of all time in the 1998 R9 OG Nike Mercurial. Where I've never been a big fan of calling out any brand for copying colorways, I just think there are only so many colors out there and so many combinations that look good, so it's not that surprising that every brand at one point or another has one colorway that is similar to another. In fact, we see it all the time, but this time around, there is no denying that Adidas knew what they were doing here, because when you look at this new Messi colorway and then look at every other remake of that R9 98 Mercurial, there is no question where the inspiration came from. And I'll be honest, I'm not mad at it. I actually think this is one of the cooler Messi signature colorways of all time. They definitely stand out. It's just a weird decision by Adidas to effectively, I guess, quote unquote, copy one of the most iconic Nike football boot colorways and designs to a lesser extent of all time. So copy or not, leave your opinions on that down in the comment section. There is no denying that the Messi version of the F50 Elite is one of the best football boots currently on the market and my personal favorite in the speed boot category. So with that in mind, we're going to take a closer look at some of the details of this colorway, but we're also going to talk about the good and the bad as it relates to fit, feel, and performance when it comes to the Messi version of the F50, because despite sharing a lot in common with the normal ones, there are some pretty significant differences that make this a very different experience. So if you're interested in learning more, including how they fit and feel on feet, please stick around, watch the entire review, and if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the first link down below. And as always, if you guys appreciate the unsponsored, brutally honest opinions on this channel, me saying what most people are not allowed to say, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2025. So first things first, I just want to quickly highlight some of the unique details of this particular colorway that we didn't get on the last couple Messi variations. The first of which is of course that border along the bottom, which has always been there, but you can see the edge is now highlighted in like a neon yellow and has a little bit of like a zigzag, almost lightning stripe appearance to it. They also added a little bit of a detail across these stripes on the front of the foot that now look like little M's rather than just being straighter lines. And you'll even notice within the micro texturing on the surface, they also have that same zigzag pattern as the bordering edge, and the little tiny detail of the Messi 10 Plus logo, which pays reference to the Teamgeist logo, where not only will Messi be wearing this signature colorway, but 10 other players supposedly selected by Messi will also be wearing these exact boots. But other than those subtle cosmetic details, they're no different from past Messi colorway drops, meaning that from a fit, feel, and performance standpoint, there are no noticeable changes. As for why you would want to pick the Messi variation of the F50 over any of the other standard models, I personally think there are two main reasons. The first being touch, the other being overall comfort. Where from a touch perspective, instead of the super thin kind of textile-based fiber touch material you find on the normal F50, the Messi variation features an upper almost entirely made out of Hybrid Touch 2.0, which is actually the same synthetic material you'll find on the top-end Predator 25 Elite. However, on the F50, whether it's because it's a slightly different composition or because of the design of the football boot, I just feel like it comes across as being a little bit softer and a smidge thicker than what you find on the F50s. Maybe something that most people wouldn't expect, given that the Predator is a control/power boot and the F50s are speed boots, but certainly from a touch perspective, this offers a little bit more substance, a little bit more softness, and just genuinely slightly more padding on the ball than what you'd get from the regular F50, which is definitely geared towards having more of a thin, raw, no padding at all barefoot feel. Which one is going to be best for you is very much dependent on personal preference, but for me personally, being somebody that tends to gravitate towards slightly more padded, leather-like feeling football boots, I really appreciate the extra softness and slightly thicker material of this Hybrid Touch 2.0, not to mention, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the video, I just think it feels significantly more comfortable against your foot. Having said all that though, this is still an upper that I would consider to be on the thinner side, where if you get stepped on, you're still going to feel a lot of the opposing player's studs digging into the top of your foot, but certainly there's a little bit more in the way of padding and protection compared to a normal F50. Something that also carries over from the normal F50, highlighted in kind of like a gray on gray, is that sprint web texturing that you can see here in the form of zigzags, kind of in like a gray on gray color. It adds a little bit of gritty texture to the surface of the upper, just a little bit of roughness that normally you wouldn't expect to provide that much in the way of grip, but it adds just enough to where the upper doesn't feel overly slick, and is an element that I really like about the new F50 in general. So it's not something that you're giving up with the Messi variation over the standard one, which also has the sprint web texturing. What's happening across the top of the foot is also a pretty significant difference over the normal F50, but one that I wouldn't necessarily say is better depending on what you like the fit and feel of, where of course you have that nice deep central lacing system that allows for plenty of adjustability, single lace hole anchoring points on either side of the upper, but you'll notice across the top of the foot you have an elasticated prime knit material with a little bit of fuse for the sake of not allowing it to stretch too much, rather than this kind of one-piece internal structure with stirrups along the side like you have on the normal F50, where if you open up the laces, you'll see that it reveals what is basically a reverse burrito style tongue, where this material is attached to the underside of the upper on the lateral side and then wraps all the way across the top of the foot, tucking in on the opposite side, effectively making this a much bigger opening when it comes to putting the boots on and taking them off, with this particular tongue design being a custom design that Messi has had on his boots for a number of years now, that is finally now being made available on the public release of his own signature boot. Where in comparison to the normal F50 tongue, it creates a little bit less tightness through the midfoot in general, which again, might not be what you necessarily love the feel of, but I would argue that from a comfort perspective, and certainly Messi agrees with this, given that this is the style of tongue he's had on so many football boots over several generations, I think it just feels better than the normal F50 design, and certainly it's a lot more simple. Other than that, pretty much everything else about the Messi F50 is the same as the standard variation. It's still a low-cut design. You have that microfiber heel liner with plenty of padding, very pillowy at the back, which I think feels very comfortable, but it also does a really nice job of locking your heel in place and generally just feeling secure on your feet. You of course get an external heel counter as a part of the new sprint frame design, which is somewhat responsive, but definitely not as crazy as what you're going to find from some other football boots. Certainly if you're looking for the most responsive sole plate within the Adidas brand, it would come from that laceless F50 Plus, which is kind of its own animal altogether. And then with the FG stud pattern, it's pretty well the same across the board, where it does kind of call back to the OG F50 Adizero from 2010, in that the layout is the same and the studs themselves are kind of more conical rather than being all blades. You technically have the blades under the heel and at the tip of the toe, but it's more geared towards all around traction in terms of still giving you that freedom to twist and pivot while still providing some decent bite, rather than just being focused on super aggressive traction pretty much everywhere like we see from so many other speed boots. So certainly if you want as much bite as possible, there are better options out there than the F50 line in general, but if you're just looking for something really well-rounded and I would argue just easy to get along with, I think this is a fantastic sole plate and stud pattern combo. And then there's the weight, where obviously the F50 line falls into the speed category, so you expect them to be light, but when you consider that the upper of the Messi F50 is thicker and more padded than the standard one, I think the assumption would be for most people that they weigh a little bit more, but how much more? Using a scale, both in the same size 9.5 US, we'll start off with the standard F50, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.7 ounces, the equivalent of 190 grams. change the scale back to ounces, and we'll throw on the Messi variation, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.95 ounces, the equivalent of 197 grams. Meaning that the Messi version of the F50 is 7 grams heavier than the thinner standard variation. Is that a huge amount of weight? Not necessarily. I personally don't think you can feel the difference on feet. What ends up being much more noticeable as a difference between these two, however, is the fit and feel of the upper, where, like I've said throughout this video, if you'd rather something a little bit thinner, you're probably going to prefer the regular F50, whereas if you want something slightly softer and more padded, the Messi version, despite the extra 7 grams, is still the way to go. On feet, the boots look and feel fantastic. Compared to a normal F50, the shaping and obviously the sole plate itself is identical, so it doesn't feel far removed from the standard thinner synthetic model, but because this Hybrid Touch 2.0 just has a little bit less structure to it, and because of this burrito style tongue, you just have less tension around your foot, particularly through the midfoot. It still has a tight speed boot fit and feel that you'd expect from a pair of F50s after all, but it's just a little bit more forgiving in terms of just having that little bit of stretch and elasticity to the upper, where they're definitely not lacking in responsiveness. They feel very secure on feet, but certainly they're a little bit softer, they're a little bit more flexible, and just generally, I don't want to say more leather-like, because I think it's very difficult for a synthetic material to ever feel truly like leather, but it definitely trends in that direction, where it's kind of like an in-between of a super soft leather and more of a plasticky, rigid, synthetic, dare I say, traditional speed boot type of material. In other words, if you really want that speed boot feel, but you don't necessarily love that restricted squeeze your feet sensation like myself, I think you'll really like the overall fit and feel of the Messi F50. From a width perspective, they definitely have some decent width to them. I would argue that this is the widest feeling version of all the modern F50 Elites, particularly through the midfoot. If you need that little bit of extra width, you will get it from the Messi variation more so than any of the other F50s. At the same time though, I don't necessarily think they are a phenomenal option if you have crazy wide feet. They still have that little bit of a tapered shape as you get into the toe box area. So if you need more width through the toes, maybe not the best option, but for most people, they should fit quite well as long as you're okay with that snug speed boot style of fit and feel. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, colorway copycat or not, I happen to think this is one of the coolest looking new boots of 2025, and I'm still of the opinion that it's also one of the best. Whereas an overall package, I don't think the Messi F50 has too many equivalents. On paper, the Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Elite, believe it or not, actually compares pretty closely. Maybe the Soquito Scudetta, and then if you want to go to the leather side of things, something like the Copa Icon 2 or even the Mizuno Morelia Neo 4 Beta might not be bad choices, but certainly if a boot like the 2014 F50 Adizero is one of your all-time favorites, there is no question that the latest Messi variation of the F50 Elite is going to be right up your alley. For me, at the moment, it's the best synthetic upper football boot money can buy, at least if you're looking for something with a little bit of a softer feel to the upper.